All right, my friends. So we find ourselves on Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph. We are on 33a. All right, 33a. And we're only 6 lines from the top, not even a quarter way down. We do have ground to cover, Baruch Hashem. We're up to the words Tanu Rabbanan. It's actually just a very small mini section. It's a brisa right before the quote from the Mishnah of Nektam Rosho. So it's just finishing up the section we were doing last time. So it's very likely still on the first page in Art Scroll, I would imagine. Okay, so Tanu Rabbanan talking about when the leaves dry out. All right, anyone you're all oriented? Okay, wonderful. Tanu Rabbanan. So Yiveshu Rov Olav. So again, right now we are talking about Hadassim. So if most of the leaves of the 3 Hadassim that you have dry out, V'nishar bo shlosha bade alin lachin, but you still have 3 sets of moist leaves, kasher, arachista, ubrosh kol echav echad, as long as there is 3 moist leaves at the top of every hadas. And I have a picture here, if that helps you visualize. I don't know. Actually, I need to turn the blur off 1 second. All right, picture time. And as you can see, here's a picture of 3 hadas. You notice,
perfect.
For the top, there's 3 green moist leaves still at the top. So if that helps you visualize it, there you go. So it's always exciting when there's pictures. Okay, moving on to next section. Nektam Rosho. So similar to a lulav, if the top of it is snipped off, right? You have a decapitated hadas, then it is pasul. Tani ula bar chanina nektam rosho also about tomorrow kasher. However, what's interesting is, unlike a lulav that essentially once you snip the top of the lulav, it's game over. The hadas is able. It's like it's like tchias hamesim. It could grow like a little bit of like a zombie protrusion, which resembles a date apparently. And if it grows something after it gets snipped off, it makes it less evident that it's missing something, and it will actually revert back to its state of kashrus. And this leads us to the following question. Boy Rabbi Yirmiyah, nektam rosho me'erev Yom Tov, but also bo tomorrow be Yom Tov, mahu. What happens if going into Yom Tov, the Hadassim had their heads decapitated, and then over Yom Tov, they grew magically overnight or at some point over Yom Tov? So, question is, yesh dichlei eitzel mitzos olo? What is dichlei eitzel mitzos? So this is I think what you probably call a shas concept. This is an idea, a principle in halacha that you'll see in many areas. I'll give you one example. There's a concept that comes up in Avelus. There's a question of maybe in certain instances, kevan shenidcha nidcha, that maybe once an Avelus is, it's the idea of what we see with Yom Tov canceling Shiva. It's kevan shenidcha nidcha. Once you cancel the Shiva for Yom Tov, the entire Shiva ends at that point. It terminates. Once you cancel Shloshim because of Yom Tov, the entire thing is completely docha at that point. So the question is, if something starts off Yom Tov as pasul, can it then revert to a state of kashrus during Yom Tov? Or is it if you start off the Yom Tov not kosher, you stay that way as well? And this is also an idea, by the way, that comes up in Hilchos Muksa. The question of if something starts off Shabbos as muksa or not muksa, can its classification change over the course of Shabbos? So there is this idea, and again, there's nuances that might dictate different outcomes, but an idea that the status it enters Shabbos is the way. So I'll give you an example, just to make it less abstract. If a rock that you find, a pebble you find on the ground, is what we call muksa machmas gufa. categorically, the typical rock you find on the ground doesn't have a function for Shabbos. But let's say you want to use that rock to hold open the door. So what you could do is that you could actually designate a rock before Shabbos and say, I'm going to use this rock. This is no longer just a rock. This is now a door stopper. So now, because you've designated before Shabbos, it's not going to be muktzah going into Shabbos. But if it's a rock before Shabbos without any prior designation, it remains a muktzah rock on Shabbos. So it's a similar kind of idea. So the question here is, if the hadas is puzzle before Yom Tov, can it then revert to a kosher status on Yom Tov if it grows that little tamar, that little protrusion on Yom Tov itself? We got the question? Okay. The question is you're right, rather straightforward, but getting to the answer is a little bit of a trip. So here we go. The tifshotle mehaditran. Well, can't we get a decisive answer? We're asking a question. Why is this a question? We know the answer to this dilemma. Where do we know the answer? From the following Mishnah. The Mishnah talking about kisoy hadam. So the halacha is that for a chaya, what we call the quote undomesticated animals, and an oaf, a bird, when you do shechita on them, you also need to do what's called kisoy hadam. You need to cover the blood as well. I was just looking through the Ramosha biography, and I just came out a random pictures. Like here, he's at the base hashchita doing kisoy hadam over there, right? So I've never been zocha to do that, but that's a halacha. Doesn't matter Eretz Yisrael or outside of Eretz Yisrael. You need to do kisoy hadam. You cover the blood with earth. So the question is, kisahu v'niskala pater v'lachasos. So if you did kisoy hadam and then the wind comes and blows it off, that's it. You've already fulfilled your obligation. No need to recover it. But kiso haruach chayiv lechasos. But let's say it was the wind which came and blew it off. Sorry, just 1 second. Blowing the fan in my eyes. Now I'm tearing up. If I tear up, it's not because I'm sad. I'm happy to learn with all of you. I just have dried out eyes right now. This has always happened. Okay, so V'tishleim Edetah Kiso v'niskala pater lechasos. Kiso haruach chayiv lechasos. But if the wind then covers it, and then you are actually chayiv to recover it. Now, what do we mean here? What's the scenario? We get clarification. V'amar Rabba bar bar Chana Amar Rav Yochanan lo shanu ela shechazar v'niskala. If the wind covers the blood on its own, you're not chayiv to uncover it and then recover it again. You can leave it as is. It's only if the wind covers it initially and then the wind blows it off again, then since you have not fulfilled your obligation, you have to go and actually do kisoy hadam. But you're not chayiv to go out of your way to uncover it and then recover it. Melchasos. And in this sugya, they asked the following question. Why would I be chayiv to go back and to recover it? I would think once the wind already covered the blood for me, the mitzvah opportunity has terminated. It's done. If the wind blows it off, big deal. It was already covered at some point. So since my obligation had terminated at one point in time, why would it all of a sudden reawaken, like Choser ben Er, reawaken and come back from the dead, and now I'm obligated once again? It must be, but Amara Papa, Zoso Meres, Ein Dichoi Eitzel Mitzvos, that we say in general with mitzvos, there's not a principle of Dichoi, that if you haven't fulfilled it, even if you are pater at some point, you could regain chiyuv. So it sounds like this is all to get to the following question. The question is, our question was whether a hadas, which is possible for Yom Tov, could that become kosher for the mitzvah on Yom Tov? But we just said, Ein dichwa eitzel mitzvos. Big deal, it was possible before Yom Tov. Now it's a kosher hadas. So what's the question bothering Rebbe Yirmiyah? We seem to have a clear answer from Rav Papa's elucidation of this Mishnah. Okay, we got the question. It seems we have a definitive ruling. You could be puzzle and turn kosher again. You could be putter and become obligated again. It could be dochi. You could terminate something temporarily, but that's not going to prevent you from becoming chayiv or kosher once again.
Rabbi?
Question. Yes, Erwin.
Is that nolad?
Erwin brings up an idea that there's an isser called nolad on Shabbos. This is possibly the issue potentially of making ice on Shabbos. I say potentially because it's a machlokas, of taking something which starts off Shabbos as a liquid and then turning it into something new on Shabbos, such as a solid. So that's a very good, what we call a zushtel. That's a good analogy in halacha. I don't know if it's precisely this principle, but it's conceptually analogous. I see what you're saying, that something starts off one way and then it becomes something else. And in that case, it's problematic because he did that. Yeah, good point.
Or if it didn't exist before. If you get a newspaper delivered Shabbos morning,
the newspaper is a whole other can of worms, Erwin. You have it right. You have issue of it coming out of the tchum. You have issues of opening the package. You have issues of reading out Shabbos. I should say, reading the Wall Street Journal Shabbos morning is my only Shabbos, but I don't pretend that there aren't halakhic complications. I think there was someone who published literally an entire book on like hilchos packages on Shabbos. You can write a book on anything, guys. That's the beauty of halacha. Anyway, to get to our answer, there actually was some ambiguity left over. Rav Papa Gufa Mivailing. Rav Yirmiya's question was about Rav Papa's shita. One option was Misha Pashitle de Dichle Isel Mitzvos Loshna Lakula Loshna Lachumra. One option to understand Rav Papa is that we say Ein Dichle Isel Mitzvos whether it has a stringent outcome or whether it has a lenient outcome. But the other way to read Rav Papa, Odilma, Safuki Misafgale, maybe he had a little bit of something. He wasn't absolutely sure. So Ula Chumra Amrina, Lukula Lo Amrina, and then take it. We're not sure how to resolve this. But maybe there's a possibility that Rav Papa only says Ein Dichle Isel Mitzvos when it presents a chumrah, a stringency. Go ahead and recover the blood, even though it was covered before. And that's a stringency. But maybe it doesn't work in the other direction to provide a leniency for me, which is that my hadas was not kosher before Yom Tov, but a dichle isel mitzvos, it could become kosher on Yom Tov. So that was precisely Rav Yirmiya's question about, was Rav Papa confident in the principle of Ein Dichle Isel Mitzvos as across the board? Or maybe even Rav Papa himself had his doubts, and he was hedging his bets that maybe L'chumra we say Dichle Isel Mitzvos, but L'kula leaning leniently, not necessarily. And then that's why he asked the following question: can a hadas, which starts off the Yom Tov disqualified, can it become kosher some point during Yom Tov? So that's not clear because it's an ambiguity in Rav Papa himself. And with that, that concludes the first main section of Gemara for today. Any questions on this point? Mm-hmm. All right. Well, going forward, my friends, but we are not done quite yet. The Gemara now is going to suggest that perhaps the machlokes about whether Ein Dichle Eitzel Mitzvos. I just want to be clear, I'll repeat myself one more time. I'm going to keep saying the words Ein Dichle Eitzel Mitzvos because that's the key term for tonight. But let me redefine it one more time just to make sure. That way I don't go the rest of this year and keep saying it and then people are like, what are you saying? Ein Dichle Eitzel Mitzvos, like dochen, dechuya, that word, like you ever say like Tisha B'Av said nidcha, it means it was pushed off to Sunday. Dochen means to be pushed off. So Ein Dichle Isel Mitzvos is saying that just because something's pushed off for now doesn't mean it's pushed off for all of eternity. Just because something's not kosher now doesn't mean it can't become kosher again in the future. Just because you're not obligated right now doesn't mean you can't become obligated again in the future. That's the principle of Ein Dichle Isel Mitzvos. Any questions on that idea that I can clarify? Because I'm going to be saying it many more times. So I'm happy to rephrase or okay, just doing my due diligence. All right, so Lema Kitanai. maybe the principle of Ein Tichei Eisel Mitzvos, whether we hold like that, is actually not a Machlokes Amarayim, but it's an earlier Machlokes of Tanaim from the generation of the Mishnah. And you can find it in the following scenario. So this is, let's see. This came up apparently on Yud Aleph and Beis quite a while ago. On 11b, we covered this. Avar v'laktan pasal. Let's say on Yom Tov itself. So we mentioned that the hadassim could grow berries, and if they grow too many berries, then they become pasal. So let's say it's Yom Tov right now. Now in Yom Tov, you're not allowed to pick the berries off, but let's say for whatever reason you were absentmindedly picking it, or you didn't know it was usher, and you didn't. You picked the berries off of the hadassim. So one opinion is pasal. Divrei Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok. Rabbi Elazar ben Tzadok says it's pasal. The Chachamim Ashir. Chachamim say if you pick off the berries anyway, you didn't do the right thing, but in the end of the day, you have a kosher lulav. I'm going to throw out a wild analogy, and we're not going to elaborate on this, but trigger warning. The Tzitz Eliezer of Eliezer Woldenberg has an iconic tshuva about, which is not exactly, but it's kind of like the basis for the question of gender reassignment surgery. And he says, and this is what people kind of miss, if someone were to get their actual genitals swapped and replaced, he says it would change their gender status. But the point that everyone misses is that he forbids the surgery to begin with. So it's only if someone violated the, let's say, Isser of genital mutilation and gets the surgery, post facto will recognize the gender swap. But you're not allowed to engage in that surgery for halakhic reasons from the outset. So again, I don't want to distract you too much, but conceptually very similar. You're not allowed to pick the berries off on Yom Tov, but if you did, you now have a kosher hadas. Okay? If that analogy confuses you more, then just leave it. It's okay. Anyway, so, and how so? How do we see this? So one conceptualization is Savru, and we're going to bring in a lot of old concepts that we've learned before. The Kule Alma Lulav Ein Sarich Eged. Everyone holds that a lulav does not need to be bound. Intimacy Lomar Sarich Eged, and even if you say that a lulav and hadassim and a ravos all need to be bound together, Lo Yafian Lulav Misuka Tichsiv Batasa V'lo Min Ha'asoy. We still, there's a principle we learned vis-a-vis sukkah, building a sukkah in the earlier prakim, that when you build a sukkah and you put the skach on the sukkah, you need to have kosher dimensions already. You can't put the skach on and then finish building the walls. You have to at least have the minimal dimensions and then put the skach on. But at this stage in the Gemara, according to this idea, this suggestion, everyone, both shitos here, hold that that's not true vis-a-vis lulav. Lulav, you could start off with the hadassim and the ravos and the lulav bound together, and then you could pick the berries off. You don't need 3 kosher minim at the time of the binding. Now, if that is true, what then is the basis of the machlokis of whether, if you pick the berries off on Yom Tov, whether it's kosher or pasal? So, my lava kamiflagi, the pasal savarina yesh dichoy etzal mitzvos. The one who says that if you pick the berries off on Yom Tov holds ein dichoy etzal mitzvos. You start off Yom Tov with a pasal hadas. You can't make it kosher on Yom Tov. And what says kosher says, no, there is dichoy etzal mitzvos. And despite the fact that it's all bound together already, there's no issue. And there's no issue of dichoy etzal mitzvos. And there's no issue there because you are able to render it kosher again. It doesn't matter that it started Yom Tov pasal. It could certainly become kosher again because we say yesh dichoy etzal, ein dichoy etzal mitzvos. So that is the suggestion that maybe this machlokes Tanaim is actually our question. Our question about whether there's dichoy etzal mitzvos and whether a hadas can revert to a kosher status on Yom Tov may actually very well be not a novel question. It may very well be a machlokes Tanaim. I think there's like some story I don't know, you can say with the Brisker Rub or whoever you want, which was someone asked him about a certain Shaila, and he's like, oh, that's such a good Shaila. It's got to be in an Akron somewhere. And then he thinks more, he's like, no. It's so fundamental. It has to be in the Rishonim. And then everybody's like, no, it's in the Gemara itself. The Gemara itself asked that question. Some questions are so fundamental that, the earliest of generations were already discussing it. However, it's possible to learn this at least two different ways, in that the machlokes is not about whether there's dichlei eitzel mitzvos. So options 2 and 3. Here we go. Option number 2. Lo. Dekule alma lo amrin yesh dichlei eitzel mitzvos. Everyone holds that we don't say there's dichlei eitzel mitzvos. Rather, v'hacha b'meilaf lulav misukah kamiflagi. It's whether we learn the principle of tasev lumina asoy, that prior to binding it, it needs to be kosher at the time of binding. If that's true, not just for a sukkah, but whether it's true for a lulav as well. So mar savar yalfin lulav misukah, mar savar lo yalfin lulav misukah. So that's the whether you hold that the hadas at the time of binding needs to be kosher or not. Maybe that's the machlokes, not about dichlei eitzel mitzvos. That's option number 2. Option number 3, which is our final option for this evening, the ibay sema ispir la lulav tzarich eged kuli alma yafina lulav misukah. So the question is, let me reread that. Ispir la lulav tzarich eged. The machlokes is about whether the lulav, hadassim, and aravos, for halachic reasons, need to be bound together. Is the binding of the lulav, hadassim, and aravos a part of the process of making it a kosher lulav, hadassim, and aravos? Right? The way we generally think of it is, this is really neat. I have a nice lulav folder. This is great. I can just stick my lulav, hadassim, and aravos in there. Well, what if I told you we don't just stick it in there because it looks nice or because it's less cumbersome, but actually maybe there's a halachic obligation, and maybe the hadassim and aravos at the time you put them in have to be kosher because binding them together is a part of the halachic act. So maybe the machlokes is about whether the eged is essential to its kashrus. So kuli alma yalfin lulav misukah. And everyone learns that tasev lumina asa. Everyone agrees that there's an issue that you need the minimum to be kosher at the time. But their machlokes is whether the binding itself is part of the qualification process. And in fact, this aligns with another machlokes found in a brisa. The Tanya, lulav bein oga bein she'ein oga kosher. So this should sound very familiar. We've seen this machlokes a few times already. The Tanakama says eged is not essential, binding is not essential. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, agud kosher, she'ein agud pasol. It is essential. And where do I get the idea that the lulav, hadassim, and aravos need to be bound together? My time, Rabbi Yehuda, yalev lakicha me'agudas ezo. We also saw this one a while back. I think still in Yudal, possibly. Ksiv hacha, it says regarding the arba minim, v'lekachtem lechem bayom harishon. You shall take these species on the first day. Ksiv hasam, it says regarding the agudas ezov, the hyssop bundle. Lekachtem agudas ezov, malalan. So what's it called? It's called an agudas ezov. Right, agudas shalom or shul, or we come together as a congregation of binding of peace, right? So it's the same shorish. So malalan aguda, just as the agudas ezo, which has the language of lekicha, of taking, needs to be bound. Afkan aguda, so too, the lulav needs to be bound. And Rabban Leisa Lakicha Lakicha, and the rabbis say we're not compelled by the Gezerah Shav of Lakicha Lakicha, and it is not essential. So maybe again, it has nothing to do with whether it is Yesh or Ein Dichlei Eitzel Mitzvos. Maybe the question just simply is whether you hold that lulav needs to be bound, and if the hadassim are not kosher at the time of binding, what do you do about that? Okay, so those are the three possibilities, and well, now we can understand. Since there was no clear machlokes in the Tanaim about this topic, and even Rav Papa left some ambiguity, we can understand why Rabbi Yirmiyah did not know when the hadas becomes kosher over Yom Tov, but it started a puzzle. He did not know what the psak was, and I guess if your hadassim gets snipped over Yom Tov and they grow over Yom Tov, and you have a question, consult your local Orthodox rabbi. I'll try to get you an answer if you really need one on what we paskin. But the real answer probably is we have hopefully extra hadassim in the refrigerator every year. And if you really need, speak to me, Rabbi Cohen, and we could help you out. Okay. Finishing up the Gemara for this evening, my friends. Mantana, lahadatana rabbanan, lulav mitzvah la'ogdo, bim lo ogdo, kosher. So this is a repeat of something we've seen a while back. We're just repeating some Gemara here. Do Chazara. So which Tana espouses the view that there's a mitzvah to bind a lulav, vim lo agdo kosher, but if you don't do so, it's not kosher. So, usually either you have to do something, you don't have to do something. But this is an in-between. This is a gray area in which ideally, it's a nice idea to bind the lulav together, but if you don't, it's not essential. It won't disqualify it. So money. Rabbi Yehuda, kilo agdo amai kosher. You want to suggest it's Rabbi Yehuda says binding is absolutely essential. It's not just a nice thing. You got to do it, otherwise it's not kosher. Rabbanan, and if you want to attribute this to the Rabbanan, my mitzvah ka'avid. What's the mitzvah? The Rabbanan say you don't need to bind it at all. So la'olam Rabbanan u'mitzvah mishum sekei v'avim. So the Gemara concludes and says, no, this is in line with the sheet of the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan say you don't need to bind your lulav in terms of securing the kashrus of the lulav, but there's this overarching principle in Kol HaTorah Kula that one should beautify their mitzvos. This is my God, and I will glorify him. So binding the lulav and hadassim and aravos together is a fulfillment of Zek Kili Vanveyu. So it's a nice thing to do. It's a mitzvah to do it. But if you don't, you still fulfill the actual halachic obligation. Okay? Any questions at this point? All right. Final section for this evening. It says in the Mishnah, Osha Yanav Meruben. If there's more berries than leaves you got on your hadassim, covering more space, you don't have kosher hadassim anymore. And that's how we had that whole discussion about picking off the berries on Yom Tov, because you want to make it kosher. Amar Achista. Davar Zer Rabbeinu Agadol Amru. I think there's a play in words here with the word makom, by the way, but we'll render it, and God should be his help. Rabbeinu Agadol taught us as follows: Lo shanu elba makom echad, aval b'shnayim o shloshim makamos kasher. The issue of the berries is when they're concentrated in a single area, and when they're concentrated all in a single area, it looks like there's like a big. It just apparently it catches the eye. It's more glaring. But if they are distributed more loosely over 2 or 3 areas, it's not as bad. It would still be kosher. However, as you might be wondering yourself, Amar le Rava, Shnayim ushlosha mekomos havi menumar apostle. But wait, if you find berries in more than one area, in 2 or 3 areas, similar to an esrog, when you have spots over it, it becomes menumar. It's like leoparded. It has spots everywhere, and that is a deficiency, apostle. So or rather, this is the teaching that was conveyed. If there's more berries than leaves, then it's puzzle. Okay, good. Now, what's Rav Chisda teach us? Rav Chisda. This is what he actually taught. Lo shanu ela anava. It wasn't a question about the location. It was a question about the coloration. Lo shanu ela anava shechoros. What kind of berries are problematic? Not all berries are the same. If you have black berries on there, so then the black contrasts very starkly with the green of the hadassim. Of Eurocos, meaning hadasu. But if the berries are green, they fit in very nicely with the hadas. It's not seen as a deficiency. The kosher. So Amar Papa, adumos kishchoros damyan, and red is categorically like black. The Amar Rabbi Chanina, I think this is a reference to Nida. Oh, interesting. The reference is Chulin and Nida. It comes up Chulin and Nida, I see. Rabbi Chanina teaches, there we go. Hi dam shachor adam. That dam, which is black, is really red, ela shalaka, but it dried out. So in Hilchos Nida, there's 5 kinds of shades of blood which are problematic. Nowadays, we don't really know how to distinguish between them. So any red we automatically deem to be Nida blood, to be menstrual blood, and would make the woman a Nida. But the color black is just presumed to be blood which has dried out, and it's really just a very, very dark red. So he's saying the same principle of coloration applies over here, that for our purposes, red and blackberries are the same. So if you have blackberries or raspberries growing on, or whatever, you know what I mean, growing on your hadassim, that would be problematic, but green ones would be kosher. So again, if you have any of these issues, consult your local Orthodox rabbi. If we are selling hadassim at the shul with berries growing on them, we might have bigger problems also. Okay, so that's our Gemara for this evening. We'll end it with on the top of Lamed Gimel Beis at the 2 dots. And this coming Monday evening, at 7 o'clock, I plan to offer the Gemara shir because we have Shavuos on Thursday. And then, just to give you, I'll try to send out a calendar, but then just to tell you right now, well, the following week, 2 weeks from now, we'll have regular Gemara shir Thursday night, God willing. And then the last Thursday of this month, God willing, we have the scheduled C-section. So, and I plan probably for the next few weeks after that to be a little bit out of commission, but I will try to get back to our normal learning schedule as soon as it makes sense. So I'll try to send out an email, and I'll try to let Matt know as well to change it in the schedule. But just to review for the immediate future before July, this coming week, Monday, the following week, Thursday, and then that will probably be all. Maybe I'll try to slip in another Monday shir if we can get in that week. We'll see how things are going. Okay, any questions before we conclude? All right, wishing everyone a wonderful Shabbos. Always a pleasure learning together.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you very much.